First tonight, on the final day of the NATO summit in Washington, Russia's reaction to the military alliance's pledge of additional military assistance to Ukraine made at the NATO gathering in the US capital has been an angry one. The Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov told reporters that it was a very serious threat to Russia's national security. He said that with the alliance insisting that Ukraine is on an irreversible path to NATO membership, it was clear that Western leaders were seeking Russia's strategic defeat. Moscow, he said, would respond with coordinated measures to keep NATO in check, but provided no details of what those might be. Earlier, in a joint statement delivered by the outgoing Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, NATO leaders pledged a minimum $40 billion of military aid to Kyiv over the coming year. In addition, Mr. Stoltenberg outlined further NATO measures to support Ukraine with training and logistics. Meanwhile, China has fiercely rejected claims by NATO leaders that it's enabling Russia's war in Ukraine. It said the NATO gathering in the US capital was hyping up Beijing's involvement. The gathering initially focused on NATO members' support for Ukraine, but then moved on to China's role in the conflict, prompting a tough response from the Chinese Foreign Ministry. It said the rhetoric from NATO was belligerent and full of Cold War mentality, and the content related to China was full of bias, smears and provocations, which it said China strongly deplores and resolutely opposes.
Security is global, not regional. Putin's war is fueled by those who do not share our values. Iran and North Korea provide direct military support, while China is propping up Russia's war economy. This is not just a temporary collision of convenience, it is a major strategic shift. And we must remain clear-eyed as to the threat it poses. As NATO allies agreed today in our summit declaration, China has become a decisive enabler of Russia's war against Ukraine. And China's support increases the threat Russia poses to Euro-Atlantic security. Allies have stated clearly that China cannot enable the largest conflict in Europe in recent history without this negatively impacting their interest and reputation. Tomorrow, NATO allies will meet with our 4 Indo-Pacific partners and the European Union, and we will continue to deepen our cooperation in addressing shared challenges.
NATO's hyping up China's responsibility on the Ukraine issue is unreasonable and has sinister motives. China's objective and fair stance on the Ukraine issue and the constructive role it has played have been widely recognized by the international community. NATO continuously spreads information fabricated by the US without evidence, openly smears China, sows discord in China-Europe relations, and undermines China-Europe cooperation. It is obvious to the international community who is fanning flames and adding fuel to the fire in the prolonged Ukraine crisis. We urge NATO to reflect on the root causes of the crisis and its own actions, listen carefully to the just voices of the international community, and take practical actions to defuse the situation, rather than shifting blames and scapegoating others. China urges NATO to abandon its outdated concepts of Cold War mentality, block confrontation and zero-sum game, correct its wrong perception of China, stop interfering in China's internal politics and smearing China's image, and do not create chaos in the Asia-Pacific after creating turmoil in Europe.
纠正错误的对华认知，停止
Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman there. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now on the line from London by Arise European Affairs analyst, Dr. Marek Laskiewicz. Good to see you, Dr. Laskiewicz. Let's start with Russia. It's reacted angrily to NATO's pledge of military assistance to Ukraine. It's very angry about the talk of Ukraine being able to, at some future date, join NATO, calling it a very serious threat to Russia's national security and warning of measures of deterrence in response. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that was only to be expected, and I think that NATO already has probably taken that into consideration. I have to say that the words of the NATO Secretary General were very strong about Russia and China, surprisingly considering this is a diplomatic event as much as anything else. And I think that by putting it so resolutely, he has, so to speak, forced Russia into a corner in the sense of making it quite clear that Russia's plan that Ukraine will not join NATO is being opposed, and that therefore Russia either has to do something about it or will have to accept it. Let us hope it is the latter.
Right, but when the Russians say that they're warning of measures of deterrence in response, is that just saber rattling?
On the whole, I would put it as saber rattling in the sense that I do not expect them to make any specific action as a result of this. Where it is not saber rattling, as I've just said, it implies that their strategy will continue to be hostile, as opposed to there being any possibility in the immediate future of any agreement. So I do not expect them to take any hostile action so much as a hostile policy.
And very strong words in reaction to NATO's comments from China, NATO accusing China of essentially supporting the Russians in their war in Ukraine with everything, basically. Is NATO's criticism justified?
Oh, I think it's quite right. The only problem is it should have been said so openly, it should have been said so forcefully. I don't see much advantage. All he has succeeded in doing by making such a speech is making it quite clear to China that they are being, so to speak, lumped with Russia, and that therefore they can only expect a hostile policy. There does not seem to be any advantage in deliberately pushing China into some sort of choice. China was okay, I think, as an ally of Russia, precisely as you said, but it didn't go as far as it could do. And now that NATO's come out firing all its guns, we can only hope the Chinese, again, do not take any further steps as a result. But the fact that he was quite right, yes, of course, everything he said is correct.
Well, I mean, the fact, of course, is that China is selling consumer goods to Russia, consumer goods and dual-use technology, which can be used for both civilian and military purposes. It's also providing, obviously, diplomatic support for Moscow. Given all that, is it hard not to come to the conclusion that Russia's war in Ukraine would be a lot more difficult if China was not providing that kind of support?
That is all true. But it does not say that if you deliberately put it publicly and in a somewhat hostile manner to China, that the Chinese will react by withdrawing. In my opinion, the way it was put, as opposed to quiet diplomacy, has made it that if China does decide to withdraw some support from Russia, it will be seen to lose face. And that is, of course, fatal in international politics. And that therefore, this unnecessarily strong speech may have the opposite result of what it was, what it had in mind.
And of course, according to NATO, which is the bit that really miffed the Russians, according to NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, Ukraine is on an irreversible path to NATO membership. What's your interpretation of that, beyond being broadly positive language? I mean, how binding is that? Is Ukraine any closer now to NATO membership?
No, it is not close in the short run. And once again, it was an unnecessarily strong point. I don't know why he made it. It's not irreversible because there's been no treaty signed. It certainly is not necessary to point this out because it's well known that the Russians were extremely touchy on the subject of NATO membership. And quite recently, President Biden himself stated that NATO membership was not perhaps all that necessary. And therefore, why deliberately bring up this topic in this way? Moreover, there's a further problem. If there is a war on, it's against one of the NATO clauses for the country to join NATO, and if has been suggested that the areas under occupation should not be recognized as part of Ukraine when it joins NATO, that's even worse, because it implies that the Russian occupied areas will stay Russian, or at least are not seen to be part of Ukraine. So therefore, again, I do not say that the speech is incorrect in what people have been saying, but it's unnecessarily strong and in many ways counterproductive.
Briefly, Dr. Laskiewicz, the new British Prime Minister Keir Starmer making it clear that UK missiles can be used on undisputed Russian territory. How do you reckon the Russians will receive that piece of news?
Oh, well, that is very bad news in some respects, because it gives Russia a certain carte blanche in retaliation. Let us hope they don't use it. But the possibilities of retaliation are quite endless, because if you say a missile can land in Russia, then why should not a missile land in Great Britain? I mean, the fact of the matter is the Ukrainians...
I apologize, Dr. Laskiewicz. I'm going to have to interrupt you there. We're going to go live to Washington, where President Biden is addressing that NATO summit. Let's listen in.
And the fact is that over the past few months, the battle for Ukraine has shifted, but Ukraine stopped Russia for Kharkiv, number one, and you should be complimented for that. Number two, you've blown up Russia's advances, you've imposed significant cost on Russia, and you made it clear Russia will not prevail in Ukraine, will not prevail in Ukraine. Ukraine will prevail. And I want you to know we're going to be with you every step of the way. 2 days ago, I announced a historic donation of air defense equipment to Ukraine. Today I'm proud to announce new security systems package for Ukraine. This will be the 8th package I've authorized since we've signed the National Security Bill. The Secretary of Defense, we can talk about what the details of all that are. I signed it yesterday, or last night, I guess. And we're working with our NATO allies to ensure Ukraine is flying F-16s this summer. And we'll show the world that we stand with Ukraine now and in the future. So, Mr. President, thank you again for being here. We got a lot of work to do together, and I yield the floor to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. Thank you very much for the invitation to summit, and thank you for such strong news about new security package. I'm grateful to you, your team, your administration, of course, Congress, both parties, both chambers, and all Americans for their vital and your strong support of Ukrainian people. Together we are saving lives of our people. You mentioned about Kharkiv. Thanks to your support and thanks to our soldiers. Really, it was tough work, but they did it, and together we are preserving Ukraine's independence and freedom, and these are historic actions that will protect the world from similar wars. And I especially want to thank today President Biden for his support and personal statement following the Russian strike on the children's hospital in Kyiv. Yes, this is our largest children's hospital, and it was direct hit by Russian missile. That is why we are greatly appreciate your decisions to strengthen our air defense, the 5 new Patriots and dozens of other systems. And we have, and I want to also to speak today how we can continue this support, and I also want to discuss with President how we can quickly and decisively stop Russian terror with this big problem for us. It's guided bombs, and of course we need some quick steps, some to lift all limitations for our Ukrainian soldiers. And of course we are thankful for that you helped us to save our energy. It's a tough period for people without energy, but anyway we are thankful to you and partners. And of course, we will discuss achieving a just end to the war. We must end this war justly and for peace to return as soon as possible. We need a second peace summit this year. Thank you for participation, and we are counting heavily on America's support in this. God bless America. Slava Ukraine.
We will stay with you, period. Thank you, press.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. President,
Okay, well, that clearly is not the address we were expecting from President Biden. This is on the sidelines of that NATO summit. He's sitting there with the president of Ukraine, President Zelensky. Clearly a solidarity press appearance, both of them pledging support for each other. President Biden, of course, under a lot of heat at the moment, following his rather disastrous performance at that debate with Donald Trump. He's still battling to remain on the ticket, and we'll see how things evolve. We are still expecting him to actually address that NATO summit later today, and also to hold a press conference that is completely off the cuff. In other words, he won't be speaking with an auto cue, and everyone waiting to see how he's likely to respond in those circumstances.